I only have a few minutes here, so I'm just going to jump right into it. The question is, where do good ideas come from? And I know in a context like this, we may just want to say God. Thanks for your time. But there are three elements that I'd like to talk to you in the process of working with companies and organizations over the years. There seems to be some commonalities, regardless of industry, of how people nurture concepts and ideas. And the three little touch points for this morning's talk have to do with ideas as it relates to its environment, purpose, and process. And there's a whole lot there. In fact, we spent 8 hours yesterday going through this. But here's the reality is that we live in a time, a day and age where ideas are plentiful. It's not that difficult to get inspired. I mean, how many of us were sitting there last night going, oh shoot, these people are incredibly inspiring. I felt smaller and smaller after each speaker. And the reality is we can get inspired easily. But I remember one of my mentors, he would often say, Charles, if you want to find the greatest collection of human treasures on the planet, all you have to do is visit your local cemetery. Because in it are buried songs that were never sung, books that were never written, business concepts that could have transformed economies that never took flight, or organizations that could have touched many, many lives, and yet people took those concepts to the grave. And isn't that true? And so it's been my life mission to reduce the percentage of people on our planet that actually take their ideas to the grave. And part of what creates a great idea are things like environment. There are certain environments in which ideas seem to flourish. And folks like Stephen Johnson in his book, Where Good Ideas Come From, have written an entire, he's done research on the environments in which ideas actually flourish. So here's some thoughts on environments. I believe some of the best ideas come from the streets. In other words, it comes from the very ones you hope to serve. It comes from your end user. If you're a technology product, it comes from the people you hope to ultimately benefit by bringing your idea into the world. And I find it pretty surprising of how many entrepreneurs, for example, that want to quote-unquote reach their customer but never get in contact with their customers while developing their plan. And for example, I co-founded an organization called Just One, and we had a friend, and it's an idea-generating nonprofit. So we give ideas away to other organizations. And one of the ideas was we had a friend named, he recently passed away, named T-Bone, who lived on the streets of Ventura, California. And when my partner, Greg, came in contact with T-Bone, he asked T-Bone, hey, is there something practical we can do that can help your life day to day? And he said, well, I don't need food, but I sure like some clean clothes. Initially, our response was, yeah, I'm sure it's some type of hygienic reason and so forth. But he said, no, it has very little to do with that. It has a lot to do with my sense of my own dignity. People treat me differently when I have clean clothes on. Law enforcement treats me differently. And so what we began to do is go into local laundromats and basically start putting quarters in machines of people who needed help with clean clothes. And we realized some families were deciding between eating dinner that night or washing their family's clothes. And it was something that many of us had taken for granted. And as people get their clothes washed, we realized there are actual needs. Instead of going in with a program, we said, hey, let's allow the very people we hope to serve to tell us what they actually need. And so each neighborhood was different. Some neighborhoods needed, after-school tutoring for their kids, and others needed a basic medical care, to Wi-Fi access, to job placement, city services, and so forth. And over the last 6 years, I think there's over 140 locations that we know of, this is pretty viral, that we know of, serving about 25,000 people a month through this thing we call Laundry Love. But it wasn't really our idea. Sure, we did some heavy lifting, refining the concept, getting resources into the hands of people who would do this. But at the end of the day, it wasn't our idea. It was an idea that came from, if you will, the streets. And I think that's really important. The environment in which, if you want to serve a particular country, guess where you need to be? In the environment, engaging people who you hope to serve. The other thing about environment is that it's been shown in some studies that creatives who are constantly pushing out work, one of the things they do commonly is they take time to breathe. And one of the ways that they do that is they go into space where they can see the horizon. So in my case, I work in a lot of urban centers, and because of that, sometimes the only thing I see is the building next to the building I'm in. So that view is kind of cut. But there's this great practice where if you can regularly go to a place where you can actually see something bigger than yourself. And it's one of the reasons we moved our offices from downtown LA closer to the beach. Many reasons, but one of the reasons is, during lunch breaks and stuff, I can go to the beach and spend 10 minutes just kind of like not doing anything, not even meditating, not reflecting, nothing, just looking out, just kind of staring into, the vast ocean and reminding myself that the things I do are pretty small compared to what's happening in the rest of the world. And that my life is just one piece of what's happening on our planet. And ideas also work well when it finds itself in an unfamiliar environment. I think this is how sometimes creativity works, is you may have one idea and you nurture it for a while, and you get another idea, you get it, and you nurture that for a while. And these are all seemingly unrelated concepts, and you keep developing them, and your spouse is going, man, you're just full of ideas, aren't you? Right? And you keep developing ideas, and after a while you may find discouragement. You're like, well, I'm going to stop recording these ideas. But the reality is the way that creativity often works is two seemingly unrelated concepts actually collide and gives you that creative spark. But unless you nurture them independently of one another, you will probably never find that creative moment. This also happens when you think about how to create things like divergent thought. In other words, put yourself in environments that are outside of your normal industry or your normal field of focus. And what that does is it will spark creativity. So one of the things that I do every year is I'll go to a couple of conferences that are outside of my area of focus. And it's really interesting to see how people in different professions problem solve. And it sparks inspiration and creativity because, I remember sitting in I am not a programmer, I am not an app developer, sitting in an app conference, trying to figure out what people were talking about. But what I picked up was how they approach problems. And I've been able to apply that to multiple different industries. And so the environment in which ideas take place is really important. And then the other thing is the fact that you need the ideas of other people. Nobody has the full idea. Ideas need to really have sex with each other. They need to mate. That's part of the way that ideas work. You may have half of a concept, and you need to meet somebody who has the other half. And you breed beautiful children or beautiful ideas, but that's the way ideas work. So if you're trying to protect your idea and saying that no one's going to see it, it really will kind of limit how creative you can actually be and to be able to kind of move forward in that context. Let's talk about purpose for just a couple of minutes. We heard it last night. Often, pain frames our purpose. In fact, a lot of our ideas are rooted in the fact that we've experienced pain in one area. It doesn't have to be personal. It can just be like the pain of not being able to do something with your computer. And so you develop a solution to answer that pain. And that's the reality, is like, don't ignore the pain you're experiencing, because quite honestly, your pain often drives the inspiration for what you will ultimately do in life. So pain is not something that you run away from. It's actually something that you can actually embrace and leverage to really get clarity on what you're ultimately supposed to do. And there's a good chance many of you are doing what you're doing because of some pain point or pain experience or moment in the past that relates to what you're trying to solve. And so ideas often work that way. And asking yourself, why does my idea ultimately matter? This is a good question. Not just like, what do you do? Like, that's the question we ask each other, right? So, hey, what do you do? What's your name? This would be a loaded question to ask, but what if we started asking each other, why does your idea even matter? Why should I care? Seth Godin said it this way: it's not that difficult to get your message out these days, but it's incredibly difficult to get people to care about what you're saying. But if you want people to care about what you're saying, it has to matter. The value proposition you bring into the world has to matter. If not, no one's going to talk about it. And just sending more emails and newsletters and flyers, it doesn't change people's minds. What really changes minds is, are you creating something that matters and is worth talking about? And if it's worth talking about, person A tells person B, and it cuts through all the spam, this is where a brand becomes remarkable, is something that you're doing actually worth talking about because somebody thinks it actually matters to the world? So what value add, what piece are you doing? And in the context of purpose and ideas, I'll just kind of close this particular section with this. I want you to ask yourself, at the end of the day, what matters most? And my recommendation to you is do that every single day. If you say your family matters most, put as much creative energy into your family as you do your ministry. If you say friendship matters most, prove it by your schedule and how you invest your resources and time. And the other thing about ideas is because ultimately the most fulfilling ideas are the ones that resonate closely to this first question, what matters most? And the second is asking this, what's enough for you? I'm talking about time, finances, those kinds of things. And the reality is if you don't have a particular goal in mind, your answer will always be more. And you will never have enough time to actually fulfill what you think matters most to you. And you're going to end up in places of burnout. For me, as a small business owner, I often say, look, I would rather make less if I could hire someone else to do the work so that I could do things that really matter most to me. For example, I like watching my son play basketball. So one of the conflicts of coming to this event is this is one of the few Saturdays where I'm missing his game. That means I really love you guys a lot. I'm missing his game, but I will work extra hard and try to be more efficient at work so I can do what matters most. And my wife and I have talked about what's enough. And if we're close to what's enough, we realize that everything else is really excess and generosity and things we really, really want to do because those things matter most to us. So your idea should resonate really closely to ultimately what matters most in your heart. Does that make sense? And lastly, just quickly, is the paradox of idea making is that you won't know which questions to ask unless you start. The questions you're asking before you launch your idea, many of those questions will become moot while you're actually working with ideas. And wisdom comes in motion. That's the way it often works. So my recommendation to you is stop making excuses and start. If you're waiting for perfection, it'll never come. If you're like, man, it's only 95% done, I'm waiting for the other 5%, believe me, that other 5% will never come. If you have 70%, you feel like you're 70% there, do it. And as you're doing it, figure out the rest. Start lean and keep reiterating your idea as you go along. And so that's the importance of process. And a couple of things to kind of close our time is, one is stop talking about your idea. Here's what I mean. There's a time when you talk about it, but studies have shown that people who talk about it quickly and verbalize it to other people, it kind of tricks your brain into thinking you're actually doing something about your concept. So you feel productive, but you're really not being productive. So my recommendation is actually write it down. There's a miracle of writing. It brings clarity, it brings direction, it brings criticism, it brings a point of reference for documentation on how the progress is going. So when you talk with somebody, you actually have something to show them. Consider all of your work as Google Docs and not some type of statue or plaque you put on the wall. Everything's up for edit. That's the world we live in. Give yourself permission. Your business plan should be editable. Everything that you do, you should give your team permission to say, this is where we are right now, but we are always up for change as we go along. And to focus on strategy and execution and measurement and improvement. And these are things that many of you already know, but constantly need to figure out a way to process and implement them. And here's the last thing I want to ask you is, like, you have a great idea, and this is why I wrote the book, is now what? It's the now what that really differentiates someone who just loves ideas and someone who makes ideas come to life. So where do the good ideas come from? I really think at the end of the day, it's about stewardship. Ideas have a funny way. If you don't implement, it will haunt you the rest of your life. Don't ideas do that? If you have a great idea, you feel like that's significant to the world. If you don't do it, it'll be in the back of your mind. And one day you're going to look back and totally regret not having done it. And so it's about environment, it's about purpose, and then it's about process. Thank you.